When Stephen King's It was adapted for a film release in 2017, few might have expected that it would become one of the most profitable box office releases of the year, given its lack of the usual staples of what tends to top the box office nowadays, be it lightweight material, pandering to children, or relying on the name of a franchise designed by committee. This film was in development for a number of years with a great deal of turnover along the way. At one point, Cary Fukunaga was signed on to direct, with Will Poulter attached to portray Pennywise in his version. Both would eventually drop out. Finally, Argentinian horror director Andres Muschietti was brought on to direct, with his sister Barbara also being hired as a producer. Andy had previously directed the 2013 horror film Mama, which he had adapted from his own short film. Mama starred Jessica Chastain, whom he would go on to hire as adult Beverly for It Chapter 2. To focus the discussion of the merits of It Chapter 1, we need to first establish the concept of death of the author. What death of the author refers to is that the intentions of the author hold little to no meaning when interpreting their work. There's no denying that Stephen King is a creative and skilled writer, as he has created numerous iconic works of fiction in the horror genre. However, not everyone that watches It Chapter 1 will have read the original book, and not all of the details from that book made it into the live-action adaptations of first the miniseries and now the feature films. Also, there have been a fair few number of jokes made about King's state of mind when writing the book.
Then you read interviews with him, he's like, I was on a lot of cocaine.
There is a psychedelic subplot involving a giant turtle that has never been included in the live-action adaptations, and the manner in which the children come together in the sewers has also never been put on screen, though this moment did raise a few eyebrows from some viewers. In analyzing Chapter 1, I am not trying to take away the importance of Stephen King's role in forming the story, but to simply treat the film as its own work of art, since there are multiple differences from the book, and also because there are different creatives involved in making the film what it is. There were many advantages to it being adapted for a theatrical release. The 1990 miniseries required numerous cuts to be made from the original novel due to its length being over 1,000 pages, and the more mature content not being permitted to air on ABC. Though Chapter 1 was only granted $30 million, a relatively modest budget for a feature film adapted from such prominent source material, this is still considerably more to work with than the $12 million the miniseries had, particularly when you factor in 27 years of technological advancements for equipment, CGI, and other facets of filmmaking. As I previously stated, similar plot points were excluded from both adaptations, such as the giant turtle and the more questionable actions of the children with one another in the sewer. It's a plot point that has not aged well and remains a hot topic of discourse to those aware of it. One of the most notable differences between the miniseries and the film is the adaptation of Beverly's story. In the miniseries, the nature of her father's abuse is watered down somewhat. Conversely, Chapter 1 makes it evident that the mistreatment she faces is far more insidious. Thankfully, this part of her story is told tastefully and with the type of sensitivity and empathy that real victims need. There's never anything graphic shown between her and her father. The implication is more than enough to communicate what she is dealing with at home. The struggles specific to her character journey are entwined with the societal mistreatment of young girls. Her peers accuse her of being involved with different boys, though she's done none of these things, and degrade her for this reputation that they themselves have fabricated against her. As she begins to mature physically, she is left to figure things out on her own, while the adults in her life completely fail to help her. People of all ages in the town display a propensity to see and treat her as an object, which is bad enough to do to a grown woman, and far more horrific when inflicted on a young girl. Though the boys she befriends ogle her at first, there is a significant difference in power dynamic than when it is adult men doing it. They're also only shown to do this at the beginning of her joining their group, after which the only continued non-platonic interest in her comes from Ben and Bill. The recurring presence of blood in her story is a symbol of her transitioning from childhood to adulthood, as well as the trauma she faces from her father and numerous other people in Derry. This is why it's a fitting choice by Pennywise when designing how to torture her. It Pennywise the dancing clown, or just Pennywise for short, has become an iconic figure of horror alongside characters like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and Michael Myers. On the very surface level of viewing Chapter 1, he works effectively as a scary supernatural clown monster. They don't dig into his origins as much, though it was reported that there was a flashback scene or sequence of sorts that had been cut from the first film that is supposedly going to be used in Chapter 2. However, upon deeper reflection, Chapter 1 presents some interesting questions about who the villain of the film really is. The point of this analysis is not to falsely claim that Pennywise is not a villain. He torments children before offing and consuming them because he thinks they taste better when afraid. But time and time again, the adults in Derry are shown to be villainous in their own right, as they inflict or are complacent in the mistreatment of the Losers Club. Not every child in the Losers Club has their parents or guardians shown to the same degree, but the ones that are shown are consistently terrible. We've already covered Beverly's father, so now we can go through the rest of the losers. Bill is the leader of the Losers Club and has a truly heart-wrenching scene in which it's made clear that his father is so swept up in his own grief about the loss of Georgie that he is unable to provide Bill with the emotional support that he needs. Bill is in denial about Georgie having gone missing a year ago, and it's perfectly understandable that a child might not know how to cope with such a significant loss. This attack on Georgie at the beginning of the film is not only important for introducing Pennywise and his modus operandi, but because it sets up this entire other thesis regarding who the villains of this story are. When Georgie is talking to Pennywise, they make a point of showing this elderly woman who sees this small boy talking into a sewer. Best case scenario, this child is talking to himself, and worst case scenario, there is a predator in the sewer. What do? Nothing. The attack happens, Georgie gets dragged into the sewer, and even when there is blood still visible on the street, what does this woman do? Nothing. Pennywise might be the one doing the eating, but these adults have completely normalized the predation of the town's children and are entirely complacent in the system of abuse. Pennywise might be the scary monster children imagine to be hiding under their bed or in their closet, but these adults are the monsters that at best sit back and do nothing to stop children from being harmed, and at worst inflict harm themselves. Ben's parents aren't shown, but since they're new to the town of Derry, they likely would not be as indoctrinated into the poisonous culture of Derry or Pennywise's influence as the adults that were born and raised in Derry. Remember that Pennywise is established in this story to have been re-emerging in Derry every 27 years to feed on new victims for at least a couple hundred years in the town's history. Ben is, however, subjected to bullying by these juvenile delinquents: Mullet, Larry the Cable Guy, Hydrogen Peroxide, and Baby Adam Driver. This is another key scene to tie into this idea of exploring who the villains of this story are. While Ben is being tormented, this car drives by and Ben repeatedly calls out for help. These adults not only hear him, they look right at him and just continue driving on by. This is where things get even more interesting, since a red balloon is shown to be rising in the back seat of the car. It can be interpreted as a more literal extension of Pennywise's possession, similar to the elderly woman shown in the Chapter 2 trailer, but I tend to lean towards a more abstract interpretation, which is that it's a symbol of the poisonous influence Pennywise has on the town, which fosters a normalization of violence against children. This is why they never intervene when the disappearances and deaths flare up again in their lifetime. The negligence of these adults is actually the part of the film I find the most unsettling. Pennywise is a brilliant work of fiction, but the aforementioned negligence bears far more resemblance to the horrors of the real world. The plot points that focus more closely in on Bill, Ben, and Beverly are by far the most significant examples of negligent adults. The material for the rest of the children displays adults being harmful to varying degrees. Richie's parents are not shown, so he's not particularly relevant here, but Eddie's mother is shown to have fostered an entirely unhealthy attachment style with him and is implied to be suffering from something in the realm of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, though perhaps it's more so an intense hypochondria that she is imparting onto him that he goes on to carry with him into adulthood. There is little to no evidence shown that Eddie is anywhere near as ill as she causes him to believe that he is. Stanley's parents are largely unseen, except for a scene in which he is being pressured to study harder in preparation for his his bar mitzvah. Apparently, this scene was supposed to represent oppressive parenting, but that just sounds like something someone with overly lenient parents would say. Finally, there's Mike, who is made to feel like an outsider because of his ethnicity. In the miniseries, they don't censor the language the bullies use against him, but in Chapter 1, they do. The implication is still there, though. He seems to be an understandably sensitive child who is less than keen on the idea of having to do away with livestock as part of the family business. This establishes an emotional distance between him and his remaining family as he struggles with the loss of his parents from a fire. And this is what Pennywise decides to torment him with. Bill Skarsgård was cast as Pennywise after Andy Muschietti was finalized as the film's director. His facial structure is striking, which always helps when casting for a role like this, but a few other eccentric physical quirks also helped him in performing the role.
Apart from being an incredibly talented actor, he has an amazing control over his body and some weird control of his face in particular.
I do this thing with my lip. It's a thing that I've been doing since I was a little kid. And I always wanted to bring this lip thing into a character. So going into the audition, I was like I wanted to use the face and play around with that.
I wanted to give Pennywise a walled eye because in my vision of the character, sometimes his eye would fall off and something that was very cute and sweet turns into something much more unsettling because he has that weird balance. So when I mentioned that I wanted to do that digitally, he said, I can do it.
I had kind of a lazy eye and I can make it go.
It was crazy because what are the chances that the actor that you cast can do that practically?
Others have drawn comparisons between his performance to that of Heath Ledger's Joker. Besides the obvious aesthetic similarities of villains wearing clown makeup, there are a lot of memorable details in their mannerisms and physicality that may also be what inspires these points of comparison. What Bill does well is borrow from all his different creative sources to put forth something that does not resemble any one thing in particular, which is of particular importance since the mythology of Pennywise is that he is not actually a creature from this world. While Tim Curry's performance is iconic in its own right, there are many things about what he does that makes his interpretation of the character more closely resemble clowns, which is further boosted by certain audio cues and scoring choices. Many people already have a fear of clowns for their unsettling mannerisms, so it's a perfectly valid way to have created his performance. Bill's version of Pennywise is perhaps more effective in conveying the ancient otherworldliness of the character. His costume is partially inspired by fashion from the Renaissance era, and his sometimes labored manner of speaking gives the impression that inhabiting this humanoid form is not natural to him, so maintaining that facade can only last so long. There's an extra emphasis put on the delight he takes in tormenting his victims. Fear is a prevalent theme in the story, and it's understandable given how much material it offers from both a writing and visual perspective. Pennywise shifts into the various shapes that allow him to manipulate or trigger fear in whomever he is choosing to focus his attention on at that particular moment in time. You may have noticed that when talking about child characters and the negligent and harmful adults, I didn't mention Henry Bowers and his father. There is a reason for that. I'm bringing things full circle now. The children in the Losers Club find solace in one another. They offer each other support when the adults in their lives do not. Henry Bowers is completely lacking in this area. He does not have friends. He only has followers who do his bidding out of fear and their youthful ignorance about adhering to the social hierarchies of their school. He is a prime target for Pennywise to manipulate instead of just being another victim to fill with fear before eating. Henry Bowers fears his father, but there's no victory to his apparent overcoming of this fear because he's ultimately been manipulated into throwing his life away. In many ways, It Chapter 1 is a story about the circular nature of trauma. Those who receive it can become the ones who inflict it, or perhaps fail to recover from it because they have normalized an entirely unhealthy standard for behavior and relationships. Fear is a natural part of life and can play an important role in the human instinct for survival, but it can also be a paralytic, both in the literal and figurative sense. The Losers Club not only offer one another the emotional support and solace they need to deal with their own traumas, traumas, but are able to share the burden of confronting Pennywise. They draw their strength from one another to confront the personification of fear itself, and it's that self-belief that allows Bill to shoot him, even though the film has made a point of showing the audience that this device is empty. Mike even says it right before Bill takes his shot, but it's Bill's belief that allows the shot to hit its mark. Pennywise is able to manipulate people's perceptions and weakens them through fear, so it's only fitting that they're able to inflict damage back onto him through their own sheer will, determination, self-belief, and bravery. The miniseries put a central focus onto Eddie's inhaler, but in Chapter 1 it was Mike's cattle gun at the hands of Bill that was a key tool, so I'll be interested to see if this means that this will be the device that makes another appearance in Chapter 2, and which of the adults will be the one to wield it. Either way, I look forward to seeing how Chapter 2 will continue to address the themes introduced in Chapter 1. As a final point of discussion, it's important to give extra credit to both Andy Muschietti and cinematographer Chung Chung-hoon. Andy did a tremendous job running things and developing this whole creative vision. He also should be commended for creating a safe space for these actors to fully develop the depths and nuances of their performances.
Andy, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to, first of all, I don't think I would have been cast without Andy, but I certainly wouldn't have been able to, I think, do it without him. Because it's such an intense and huge undertaking, this character, in terms of the perception of it and what people think of the character from before and what their anticipation is for whoever's gonna, you know, perform and do the character next. It's terrifying, and it was terrifying, and Andy was there believing in me, and I always I needed that external thing, because within my own self-doubt, I could always go like, well, Andy's here, he's really smart, he's really good, and he thinks you can do a good job, so don't worry too much. That really helped me through him as well, and I trusted him, and we had very similar thoughts of who the character was. Even like I remember the first time after the auditioning process, and then this was actually before I think I booked the job, but I was in Toronto for a screen test. You know, I had dinner with Andy, and we sat down and we talked, and I just said all the ideas that I had for what the character could be, and he told me his, and we were like, oh, we really do think alike here. We've sort of found someone. I don't think we ever argued or had a dispute about anything. It was very clear what we thought the character should be. It's a rarity when it comes to acting that you find someone that you can collaborate that well with.
The cinematography in this film is absolutely stunning. There are so many striking visuals that have become iconic. I have a real soft spot for this lighting in the sewer scene, where there's extra light that focuses on Pennywise's eyes. Chung put a lot of emphasis on lighting all the characters' eyes and having these low-angle shots that are really effective in putting the audience into the perspective of these children. But perhaps it's no surprise at all that Chung did an excellent job, since one of the earliest films he did cinematography on was Old Boy. Chung isn't doing the cinematography for Chapter 2, but since Chapter 1 was such a hit with viewers and had such giant box office numbers, I think Andy was given even more freedom to do as he pleased with Chapter 2. The runtime is close to 3 hours, presumably the budget was bumped up, and I have every hope that the film as a whole will make as powerful of an impression as its predecessor.
Fear.
Hi everyone, it's LadyJenevia. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching my review of It Chapter 1. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a like and leave a comment down below to let me know what you thought of the film or my video, or what you're hoping to see in Chapter 2. Presuming that you're watching this before Chapter 2 comes out. It's only a few weeks away. I'm very excited about that. Also be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram and Letterboxd in order to follow along with more of my running commentary about all my favorite films and TV series. See you next time. Bye.